Good afternoon. Today I will present a research which was done in cooperation and cooperated with the chair of our faculty, Ludmila Dutsenko, and Associate Professor Svetlana Titova. At first, it seems that the topic of our research is of a legal nature, but in fact, we regarded this issue from the point of view of land resources management and land management in general. On this slide, you see the well-known map of war in Ukraine, quite from deep state, and you see that gradually and slowly we managed to return some territories. At the same time, this map shows that unfortunately so far we returned only those territories which were occupied not for a long time. And for those territories, the problem which we discussed in our research is not typical. But we are talking about renovation of legal relations and land relations on the territories which were occupied since 2014 and which will be brought back to under Ukrainian control in the future. So this return of territories requires a number of stabilization measures which had to be taken within 3 steps. First, it is a military deoccupation, then humanitarian demining, and restoration of basic infrastructure. At the second step, we need to restore the work of governmental authorities and start up at least basic economic activities. And at the third step, we have to plan comprehensive renovation of territories. During this war with Russia, what happened to property relations on the occupied territories? Part of the territory of Ukraine was occupied back in 2014. Before the full-fledged invasion, the situation was that transactions with immovable property on these territories were possible on the territory controlled by Ukraine, irrespective of the location of this property. So if that property was located on occupied territory, then on the controlled by Ukraine territory, it could be changed the property rights. In 2022, the situation radically changed when all the registers were closed in Ukraine. The state land cadastre didn't function for some number of months. This process began in May 2022. The cadastre and a register of immovable property rights was opened for the not occupied territories, or at least part of which, if a part of the community was occupied, the register was
майже 700 тисяч населення, у них реєстр то відкривали.
In particular, the city of Zaporizhia, they opened and closed the register. As far as I know, cadastre and register at the moment are closed because the part of the Zaporizhia Oblast is under occupation. Therefore, all people on property on the occupied territories remain out of law, and we cannot do with that. What should happen after the occupation of these territories? How the renovation or restoring of property relations should take place on the basis of Ukrainian legislation and cadastres and registers. What's happening now on the occupied territories, those territories which have been occupied for a long time, since 2014 or since the beginning of full-fledged invasion? People living there need to conduct property transactions. There are 2 ways of solving this problem. Either to live for the territories controlled by Ukraine and to conduct these transactions according to Ukrainian legislation, And now it is impossible. So some people from 2014 to 2022, only a small number of people were able to go to the controlled by Ukraine territory and conduct these operations. But now it's impossible at all. Or people are forced to register their transactions on the basis of Russian legislation, but Ukraine does not recognize documents issued by occupation authorities. Therefore, our task is to identify the ways of renovation of property and land relations on occupied territories and to legitimize the rights of Ukrainian citizens. So let's first talk about how to bring the economy back to functioning, because these property relations are the foundation of functional economy. Only some documents at the state level exist, and particularly studied such a document as Strategy of Economic Development of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast up to 2030. This document was adopted right before full-scale invasion for the territories occupied since 2014. In this document, it is said that the industry which existed in that region was completely ruined, and it is proposed to develop these regions and bring them back to normal life, starting with the development of agro-industrial complex, first of all, because Ukraine is an agro-industrial country, and it is proposed to develop husbandry and working on arable lands with watering, and this requires restoration of rights of landowners and land users on the occupied territories, which will help to overcome the large-scale ruining of economy on that territory. Why was this way selected for this oblast? The total territory of Donetsk Oblast lands is 2.65 million hectares, and Luhansk Oblast roughly the same. And of this territory, 2 million hectares in Donetsk Oblast is arable land, which is 5% of all arable land in Ukraine. Same for Lugansk Oblast, 70% of Oblast territory of Oblast is used for agriculture. So this is very perspective agri-industrial regions, and the lands there of high fertility. So with the prices for 2021, a return of 1 hectare of agricultural land would provide for production of 25,000 hryvnias from hectare of the profit for the state. So talking about that part of economy where land is a means of production, I mean agriculture, we need to protect rights of landowners and land users. So this protection of rights has physical and legal aspects. Physical aspect is, first of all, connected with demining. It is described in details in the strategy of the development of this oblast. And the point number 1 means examination and surveying of agricultural lands in order to find out a need to demine them, because demining is lengthy and expensive process. So first we had to decide whether it makes sense to demine these lands in the first place. Then the inventory list of this land should be created in order to find out the real landowners and land users. And the third stage would be engagement of international organizations into humanitarian demining. The legal aspect has not been well drafted, well developed, but we may identify three blocks of issues here. The first block is about a need to regulate the issue of land which was used for fortifications, as well as large portion of land is being polluted with various explosives. And also another illegal aspect is that there is a need to regulate the issue of taxation of agricultural land, which was taken out of use because they started to talk about minimization of tax debt only in 2022, but since 2014 to 2022, they formed a huge tax indebtedness over there. We also studied the issue of reintegration of Crimea, as well as not enough work was done on this issue. One of the most important works is the work by Yuri Smelansky, and he identifies that in the process of drafting strategy of the occupation for Crimea, 5 blocks of issues should be resolved.
Адміністративно-територіальний і політико-територіальні блоки, які включають
political and territorial package, which is about setting up communities on the peninsula, ecological and cultural issues. We have to take into account the social and economic instability in those regions, a high level of domestic conflicts, and lack of trust in law enforcement bodies. The lack of decisions of government in line with the aforementioned challenges can result in a situation that the population of those territories will refuse to come back to the Ukrainian legal framework. There is also a document which is called the Strategy of Cognitive Deoccupation of Crimea, which says that we need to affect the mentality of people on the occupied territories. But none of these documents tells us what is going to happen to the property which people have documents for signed by occupational authorities. So what do we suggest doing? We suggest that we have to acknowledge the Ukrainian pieces of legislation which are relevant for this, as regards those which were based on Russian legislation. There should be a procedure similar to inheritance procedures. Inheritance cases are concluded within 9 months, and notaries can open cases, and within 1 year, the cases would remain open. And at the final stage, we suggest making inventory of lands and to develop comprehensive plans for the restoration of territorial communities. Thank you for your attention.